They say silence heals wounds, but mine only deepened them. I'm Clara, born in 1963 in Melbourne, Australia. Back in 2005, at 42, my life cracked open when trust within my own family betrayed me. I felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath me, but then something happened that changed everything. Today, at 62, sitting quietly in my living room with the hum of the city in the distance, I'm finally sharing this because secrets rot the soul. If you're listening, drop your city below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. It all began on a rainy Thursday. The kind of day where the clouds hung low, pressing against the rooftops, and the smell of wet asphalt crept through the cracked kitchen window. My phone buzzed, a simple chime of an incoming email. I wasn't expecting anything, maybe a newsletter, maybe a receipt from the groceries. But the sender's name stopped me cold, from Amelia. My 17-year-old daughter rarely emailed me. She preferred quick texts filled with abbreviations I barely understood. I smiled, thinking maybe it was a school project or she needed help printing something. I tapped the screen, expecting casual words. Instead, the subject line read, "I don't know how to tell Mom." My chest tightened. My thumb hovered over the screen before I finally opened it. And there, like a blade pressed against my chest, were the words not meant for me but for my husband, Richard. "Dad," the message began. "I don't know how much longer I can handle her rules. She doesn't understand me. She's always the enemy. You're the only one who gets me. Please don't leave me alone with her for too long. You promised we'd always be together against her. You promised she'd never know." The words blurred. I blinked, scrolled down, and read again. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't twisted in that sense. But it cut me deeper. My husband, the man who had stood beside me for 21 years, had been making promises in the dark, painting me as the villain in my own daughter's eyes. My hand trembled so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I looked around the room, the pale yellow walls, the half-folded laundry, and the framed family photo on the mantel. The smile in that photo mocked me. It whispered that everything I believed was a performance. Richard, with his arm around me. Amelia, her eyes bright, leaning against us. I thought we were a unit. Instead, I was the outsider. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded like a fist against my ribs. I wanted to march into Richard's study, throw the phone on his desk, and demand answers. But then, a quiet voice inside me whispered, "Don't. Not yet." I closed the email, slipped the phone onto the counter, and forced myself to breathe. Amelia's footsteps pounded up the hallway. She appeared in the doorway, her school bag slung over one shoulder, her damp hair curling at the ends. She smiled, carefree, not knowing what she had done. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice light. "What's for dinner?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her if she really thought I was the enemy. But instead, I swallowed the words and forced a smile. "Lasagna," I said. My voice cracked on the syllables, but she didn't notice. She just hummed and disappeared into her room. That night, I lay in bed beside Richard, listening to his steady breathing. He rolled over, draped his arm across me, as though he was the safe haven I could lean into. I stared into the darkness, stiff as stone. His warmth burned my skin, not with comfort but with betrayal. I thought about the promises Amelia wrote about. What promises had he made? That I wouldn't know? That he'd stand with her against me? The more I turned it over in my head, the more poisoned my memories felt. Every time Richard had comforted Amelia after an argument, had he been using it to turn her further away from me? The days that followed were torture. I became an actress in my own home. Smiling, cooking, listening, all while my chest carried the weight of that email. Amelia's laughter in the living room felt like a secret mocking me. Richard's gentle touches felt like veiled cruelty. One evening, Amelia sat at the dining table with her laptop open. She giggled at something on the screen, then said, "Dad, remember what you told me? About how sometimes Mom just doesn't get it." My fork clattered against the plate. Richard's eyes flicked to me, then back to her, his face smooth as stone. "Yes, darling," he said calmly, "sometimes people just have different ways of showing love." Different ways of showing love. I nearly choked. Was that how he softened it? Turned my discipline into coldness, my guidance into cruelty? Amelia looked at him with such trust, such admiration, and I sat there, invisible. Later that night, I crept into the study. Richard's computer was still on. My palms sweated as I moved the mouse, the screen lighting up with his inbox. And there they were, emails, dozens of them, from Amelia to Richard. She poured out her feelings, her struggles at school, her anger at me, her fears. And in reply, Richard played the hero. He promised her secret outings, promised her she never had to listen to me if it made her unhappy, promised he'd always be on her side. My chest felt like it might burst. It wasn't just one message. It was a pattern, a manipulation. And it wasn't Amelia's fault. She was a teenager, raw and searching for identity. Richard had painted me as the wall in her way, while he positioned himself as the escape door. I sat in that chair until my vision blurred with tears. Every keystroke he had made, every promise, was a betrayal not only of me as a wife, but of me as a mother. He had stolen my daughter's trust, and he had done it quietly, with the patience of a man weaving a trap. When Richard came in and found me there, his face froze. "Clara," he said softly, almost with pity. "You weren't supposed to see that." I turned to him, my face streaked with tears, my chest heaving. "You weren't supposed to do that," I whispered. He reached for me, but I pulled away. The fury in my veins burned hotter than any touch he could offer. For the first time in years, I saw him not as my partner, but as my adversary. From that night, I knew my life would never return to what it had been. Trust was gone. The ground beneath me was split. I was no longer just a wife or a mother. I was a woman betrayed from both sides. And I knew I would need strength I had never called upon before. The next morning, I kissed Amelia's forehead before she left for school, my lips trembling. "Have a good day, darling," I said. She smiled at me, but I saw the flicker of distance in her eyes, the gap Richard had carved between us. And as the door closed behind her, I pressed my palms against the cool kitchen counter and whispered to myself, "This isn't over." I began to move through my own house like a shadow. From the outside, nothing had changed. I still cooked meals, folded laundry, watered the garden roses that Richard had once planted for me on our 15th anniversary. But inside, I was bleeding. Every sound, the closing of a door, the tapping of Amelia's keyboard, Richard's low voice drifting down the hallway felt like a warning bell. The hardest part was pretending not to know. Amelia still walked in with her bright, careless laughter. She'd sit with Richard in the living room, her eyes lit up in ways they never were with me. Their conversations were soft, conspiratorial, like shared secrets wrapped in ribbon. Whenever I entered the room, silence would fall just slightly, like a curtain dropping. My presence was the unwanted pause. I told myself I wouldn't explode, not yet. Explosions are loud, they burn fast, and then they fade. I wanted something different. I wanted to see with clear eyes before I struck. I wanted to know how deep the betrayal ran, how far Richard had gone in pulling Amelia away from me. At night, I lay awake and listened to the house breathe. Sometimes Amelia would slip into Richard's study, her voice low, trembling with teenage vulnerability. I'd hear Richard reassure her, his words floating through the cracks of the walls. "You know I'll always be here. You don't need to worry about your mom's strictness. She just doesn't understand how unique you are." Those words sliced me open again and again. I was the mother who carried her, who stayed awake through fevers, who taught her to tie her shoelaces, who kissed every scraped knee. But now I was reduced to the villain in her story because Richard chose it to be so. One Saturday, I stood by the kitchen sink, rinsing mugs, when I overheard them in the garden. Amelia's voice floated in first, full of laughter. "Dad, remember when you said you'd take me to Sydney without telling Mum?" I froze. Richard's deep chuckle followed. "Of course, darling. That's just between us." She wouldn't understand anyway. The mug slipped from my hand, shattering in the sink. The sound startled me, but neither of them came in. They were too lost in their own world. I pressed both hands on the counter, gripping until my knuckles turned white. A trip. Plans made in secrecy. He was teaching her to lie, to divide, to cut me out completely. I began writing everything down in a notebook I kept hidden under the mattress. Every overheard promise, every lie, every email I discovered when Richard forgot to log out of his account. Not because I wanted to punish Amelia, no, she was a child. But because I knew the day would come when the truth needed to be shown plainly, and I'd have no room for doubt. The more I wrote, the heavier the book grew, and the heavier my heart became. Amelia's words on those pages were daggers. She makes me feel like I'm never good enough. You're the only one who loves me as I am. Sometimes I think she doesn't even want me here. I cried quietly into my pillow most nights, careful not to let a sound escape. Because pain shared too early can be dismissed, but pain kept long enough turns into evidence. And yet, even in the middle of betrayal, I still loved them both. That was the cruelest part. I loved Amelia with the marrow of my bones. I loved Richard, or at least the man I thought he was. My love was tangled with grief, and grief is a heavy chain. The weeks turned into months. I noticed Amelia avoiding me more, her answers short, her eyes rolling when I asked about schoolwork. But with Richard, she bloomed like spring after a long winter. He fed her confidence, but it was a confidence sharpened against me. One evening, I tried to reach across the gap. I knocked on her bedroom door, stepping inside with 2 cups of hot chocolate. She was curled on her bed, scrolling through her phone. I sat beside her, forcing a small smile. "I made your favorite," I said softly, offering the mug. She took it, her fingers brushing mine briefly. "Thanks." Her eyes never left the screen. I searched for words, something simple to remind her of us. "Do you remember when we used to bake cookies together? You always ate half the dough before it made it to the oven." Finally, she looked at me, but her face was blank. That was a long time ago. The dismissal stung, sharper than I expected. I sipped my own chocolate to hide the tremble in my lip. "I'm still here, you know. If you ever need me." She shrugged. "Dad listens better." I set the mug on her bedside table and left before she could see the tears welling. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, and I realized that silence had become my closest friend. Richard noticed my quietness. Sometimes he'd study me across the dinner table, his eyes calm but searching. "You've been distant, Clara," he'd say. "Everything all right?" I'd smile faintly. "Just tired." Inside, I was screaming. But I would not give him the satisfaction of knowing I was broken. I wanted him to believe I was crumbling so that when the time came, my strength would blindside him. There were moments when I almost confronted him when the anger boiled so hot I felt it in my throat. Like the night I found Amelia's diary tucked under her pillow. I hadn't meant to read it, but it fell open in my hands, and my eyes couldn't stop. She had written, "Mom will never understand me. Dad promised he'd take me away if things got worse. Sometimes I wish it was just me and him." I clutched that book to my chest, tears dripping onto the pages. I wanted to storm into Richard's study and throw it at him, scream until the neighbors heard. But instead, I tucked it back where I found it, kissed Amelia's forehead while she slept, and walked away with my heart in pieces. My silence became my weapon. I gathered more, I watched closer, I waited. Amelia might see me as the enemy now, but I believed one day she would see the truth. One day she would need to know who her mother really was. And so, I bore the wounds in silence, each cut deeper than the last. I stitched myself together in the dark, while in the light I smiled faintly and played the role of the forgotten mother. But in my chest, a storm was gathering, and storms never stay hidden forever. The storm inside me could not be caged forever. Months of silence, of swallowing my pain, had forged something sharp within me. Every secret I uncovered, every email and whispered promise, became the kindling for a fire I could no longer put out. I knew the moment was coming not in fury, but in precision. It happened on a Sunday. The sky outside was a pale blue, the kind of deceptive calm that hides the brewing of a storm. Amelia was in the living room, sprawled on the couch with her phone. Richard was in his study, the door half closed as usual, his voice low while he typed on his computer. I stood in the hallway between them, holding my notebook in my hands. My weapon. My truth. I walked into the living room first. Amelia looked up briefly, then back at her screen. "Hey, Mum." Her voice was flat, polite in the way strangers are polite. "Amelia," I said softly, sitting on the edge of the couch. My hands trembled around the notebook, but my voice stayed calm. "I need to talk to you. And your father too." She frowned. "Is this about homework again?" "No," I whispered. "It's about us." I called Richard in. He appeared in the doorway, his face unreadable. "What's going on?" I held the notebook up. "This," I said simply. "This is what's going on." He froze. Amelia's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" I opened it, flipping through the pages, the evidence I had gathered piece by piece. "It's everything," I said, my voice steady. "The emails. The conversations. The promises. Every word that has been spoken about me in this house, while I wasn't meant to hear." Richard's face paled, but he tried to recover, stepping forward. "Clara, let's not do this." "No," I cut him off, my voice rising for the first time in months. "We are doing this now." Amelia looked between us, confusion clouding her features. What are you talking about?" I turned to her, my eyes softening despite the rage burning inside. "Darling, I read the email you sent me by mistake. I've seen the others too. The ones where you say I'm the enemy. The ones where your father promised you things behind my back." Her phone slipped from her hand. You weren't supposed to." "I wasn't supposed to know," I finished for her. "That's exactly the point. You've been told I don't understand you. You've been told I don't love you as you are. But, Amelia, that's not the truth. The truth is, your father has been turning you against me, little by little, feeding you lies so that you'd see me as your jailer and him as your rescuer." Richard's jaw tightened. "Clara, you're twisting this." "Am I?" I snapped, slamming the notebook onto the coffee table. The sound made Amelia flinch. "Read it. Every word is there. Every promise you made to her in the shadows. How you told her I wouldn't understand. How you encouraged her to hide things from me. How you made me the villain in my own daughter's heart." Silence fell heavy in the room. Amelia stared at the pages, her lips trembling. "Dad, is that true?" Richard reached for her hand. "Darling, I only wanted to protect you. Your mom is strict, and I didn't want you to feel alone." "Protect her?" I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in my own ears. "By lying? By dividing us? By stealing her trust from me so you could play the hero? That's not protection, Richard. That's betrayal." Amelia's eyes welled with tears. She pulled her hand back from his grasp. "You promised me," her voice cracked. "You promised me she was the problem." Richard tried again, his voice desperate now. "I just wanted you to feel understood." I looked at Amelia, forcing her to meet my gaze. "Darling, I may not have always been easy. I set rules because I wanted to protect you, because the world can be cruel. But I never wanted you to feel unloved. Not for 1 second." That was his choice to twist. Tears slid down her cheeks. She grabbed the notebook, flipping through the pages, her hands shaking. She read her own words, Richard's replies. With each line, her face shifted confusion, anger, realization. She looked up at him, her voice breaking. "You made me hate her." Richard reached out again, but she recoiled. "No, you did this. You made me believe she didn't care about me." I sat there, my own tears finally spilling. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was sorrow, the raw ache of years crumbling. But beneath the sorrow was something stronger, release. The truth was out and the poison had been named. Richard sank into the armchair, his face pale, his mask gone. For once, he had no words. Amelia looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time in months. "Mum," she whispered, her voice small. "I'm sorry." I gathered her into my arms, clutching her against me as she sobbed into my shoulder. "It's not your fault," I murmured into her hair. "You were only a child, and children believe the ones who promise them the world. But I will always be here. Always." Richard's silence was deafening. He knew what he had done, and there was no undoing it. In that silence, I found my revenge not in shouting, not in rage, but in showing him that the bond he tried to sever had been reforged stronger than before. He had lost the power he once wielded in the shadows. From that day forward, Amelia and I began to heal. Slowly, with scars, but together. Richard remained in the house for a time, a ghost of the man he had once pretended to be. But he no longer held her heart nor mine. And when he finally left, suitcase in hand, neither of us begged him to stay. My revenge was not his ruin, it was my survival, my daughter's awakening, and the truth standing bare in the light. That was enough. If you're listening, remember this. Deception may last in darkness, but truth burns brighter than any secret. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this with someone who needs it, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Moral lesson. In silence, lies grow strong, but truth spoken with courage restores bonds, heals wounds, and gives back power to the betrayed heart.